Chapter 821. Barbara waved at Maisie, and she walked over to her. She pulled the chair and took her seat. What happened? You seem nervous. Barbara pulled a folder out of her bag and put it on the table. I found something related to my uncle. He was at the Glitz Club the day of his accident. Maisie picked up the folder and opened it. The surveillance camera captured some images. Barbara took the cup of coffee and said, "The man beside my uncle is the owner of the Glitz Club. So you suspect that these things have something to do with the people behind the Glitz Club as well?" Maisie asked as she looked at her. Barbara let out a bitter smile. I really don't get it. If they want to offer me help, why are they still keeping me in the dark? If my uncle's death is really related to them, the person must be up to something for helping me in the first place. But the Chases and the people from the Glitz Club have no grudges against each other. So I can't figure out why. It would make sense if they were their enemies in politics, but the owner of the Glitz Club had nothing against the Chases. Could it be that they were working for those people too? Barbara suddenly thought of something and said, "Oh yeah. I heard that Mr. Zhivkov has run away. Do you know about that?" Maisie nodded. Yeah. Mr. Zhivkov helped the people from above to sell a batch of goods, but the batch of goods was hijacked last night. I guess Mr. Zhivkov doesn't want to get into trouble. So he cut ties with them first. I learned something yesterday by accident, Barbara said as she pulled a photo out. I guess you should know her. When Maisie saw who the person in the photo was, she was slightly stunned. Maisie? The face of the man standing beside Maisie was not visible. However, he was almost as old as Maisie's father, judging from his age. Maisie was holding his arms, and they seemed very close to each other. After Maisie was chased out of her family, other than her mother's support, she also found someone to back her up. I heard that he's one of the higher-ups. Maisie squinted her eyes. How did you know about it? Barbara chuckled and replied, I have eyes in the Glitz Club too. Otherwise, how do you think I would get the surveillance video of my uncle's visit to the club? This photo was taken from the video too. It happened about a week ago. Maisie followed this man to the Glitz Club. Mr. Zhivkov was there as well that day, so I can assume that this man should be related to the person behind Mr. Zhivkov. The Glitz Club was filled with many powerful figures. Many big shots, including the higher-ups, liked to meet at the Glitz Club. The major reason was that the Glitz Club was very good at protecting their guests' personal information, as some of the rich big shots did not want anyone to know they were spending money there. The receptionist would keep the customers' information private, and as long as they spent their money there, the Glitz Club would not care even if the customers gave them fake names. When she had been to the Glitz Club with Nolan last time, he had used a fake name. This practice actually saved their customers a lot of trouble, and it was the reason Peter liked to bring his lovers to the Glitz Club. After all, even if his wife noticed something and went to ask the receptionist, there was nothing she could do if Peter had not left any real information about him. Besides that, it could also provide temporary relief for some of the people who were being hunted, as their enemies wouldn't be able to find them as long as they stayed in the Glitz Club. The insiders knew the background of the Glitz Club and what kind of people they entertained. Even if the customers did not leave any real information, as long as someone made a scene in the club, they could be tracked down through surveillance. Since they did not want to offend the wrong people and get themselves into trouble, most of the people in the Glitz Club, especially those wealthy men or influential figures, would try their best to keep a low profile in the Glitz Club. After Maisie left the coffee shop, she sent the picture Barbara had given her to Quincy. Nolan was playing golf with Yael when he received a text message from Quincy. Yael hit the ball and asked, "Have you found anything?" Chapter 822. Nolan put his phone away and chuckled. I had no idea that Nathaniel, the owner of a chain enterprise, would be related to the higher-ups. It seems like I've underestimated him. The Hannigans? They are part of it too? Yael straightened his body and turned around to look at him. I'm not sure about Nathaniel, but his daughter is, Nolan replied as he hit the ball into the hole. Do you know Tony? Yael then replied calmly, Tony is a local tyrant in Asperia. He's the boss of all of the clubs in Asperia, and you can say that he's Peter's boss too. When Michael raided Peter's club, Tony seemed to be aware of it, so he found someone to replace him. Nolan squinted his eyes. So he's the one who's going to replace the Chases? Yael nodded. That's right. Tony probably would take over Caleb's position after his death. It seems like Tony was aware that something was wrong with the batch of goods. I wonder how he knew our plan. Nolan's face turned dark slightly. Probably someone who knows me was there that night. They must have recognized my men. In a hotel suite. Maisie was sitting on the couch in her bathrobe. While she was applying nail polish to her toenails, she talked on the phone, Don't worry, Godfather. They won't know it's me. After I help you get the position you want. Don't forget to help me set up a matchmaking meeting with the Bouchers. She hung up the call, and a smile was playing on the tip of her lips. So what if she had been kicked out of the Hannigans? Thanks to some higher-ups her father knew, she had been able to get to know Tony. She messed up Nolan's plan and saved Tony's life this time. After Tony took over the Chases and joined forces with the higher-ups, even the Bouchers would not be able to go against them. At that time, Francisco would be hers. She was certain that Nolan did not expect she had been sitting in the passenger seat when she went there last night with Tony and recognized Sadai. She had said something to Tony, and it was only then Tony asked Peter to test Sadai out. She was delighted that she had managed to get revenge on Nolan by foiling his plan. After Tony successfully rose to the position and she married into the Bouchers, she would make Maisie and Nolan pay for everything they had done to her. The truck stopped outside the city. Sadai and a few of them were taken out of the truck, and a few vans that came to meet them from the other side were parked not far away. They seemed to be discussing something, but Sadai couldn't hear it since she was too far away from them. However, judging from their actions and expressions, it seemed to her that they couldn't enter the city. One of the men with a tattooed arm and a fierce facial expression looked this way and ordered his men to unload the goods. Gerald's men were tied up with ropes. Sadai had untied them in the middle of the night, so they were just pretending that they were being tied up right now. They're going to change to another vehicle, the man with a buzz cut whispered to Sadai when he saw those people unloading the goods. Sadai looked at the few vans. It seemed that she was right. The truck was targeted, and they couldn't enter the city. They needed to switch vehicles to deliver the goods into the city separately. The tattooed man was holding a cigarette between his lips. One of his underlings lit up the cigarette. And he took a long drag from it. After that, he walked toward them and snarled, Just you wait, you bastards. We're going to show you who's the boss once we arrive at Asperia. Someone spats at him, and the tattooed man's face turned grim. He kicked the man to the ground and shouted. How dare you spit at me? He spat at the man back and kicked him a few more times. The man had been injured last night, and he couldn't get up from the ground after receiving a few kicks from him. Chapter 823. The veins on the buzz-cut man's neck bulged as he gnashed his teeth. As if she knew what he was going to do, Sadai stopped him. No, just hold on a little longer. When the tattooed man saw the defiant look on the man, he said, what's with that face? Do you want to bite me? He then walked toward the man, but he was looking at Sadai. He pushed the buzz-cut man away, causing him to lose his balance and fall to the ground. The buzz-cut man wanted to pounce at him. But another two people from the back came forward and pinned him on the ground. The tattooed man took a drag from his cigarette and blew the smoke on Sadie's face. Sadai squinted her eyes and looked at him expressionlessly. I had no idea that Gerald would recruit a woman. This is rare, the tattooed man said as he smiled lecherously. He lifted his hand to caress her cheek and continued. You have fair skin, and your flesh feels so delicate. Are you sure you can take a few punches from us? It's not that easy for a woman like you to survive in this world. Rather than following that crippled Gerald, why don't you come with me instead? I assure you that you'll lead a good life in Asperia. Sadie remained silent. The buzzcut man shouted nervously, if you're a man, then stop forcing a woman to do something that she doesn't want to do. The tattooed man jerked his head around and said gloomily, so? After all, none of you will be able to get away once we enter the city. So, why can't I have some fun now? He threw the cigarette stub on the ground, clasped his hands together, and went closer to Sadie. We're now in the middle of nowhere, and all of them are my men. Even if you shout yourself hoarse, no one will come to your rescue. Sadie finally opened her mouth and said, you can try it if you want to die. The tattooed man waved off Sadie's provocation with a shrug. He said, I'm more willing to die if I can spend a wonderful night with a pretty woman like you. Sadie suddenly lifted her knee. The tattooed man couldn't evade in time, and his face contorted out of shape in pain. Sadie broke herself free from the rope. The people behind her quickly came forward. She swiftly pulled her switchblade out and met the incoming men straight on. When a man performed a sweeping kick on her, she grabbed the man's ankle with deadly precision. She held him so tightly that he couldn't even move. Then, she slammed him to the ground and delivered a kick at him, causing him to fly several feet away. She dodged 3 attacks at the same time, lifted her elbow to strike one of them, and spun around to deliver a flying kick at the next one. The people who were unloading the goods all rushed towards Sadie simultaneously. Gerald's men freed themselves from the ropes and joined Sadie to fight with them. Sadie's movements were swift and deadly. While one of them pulled out a gun, Sadie snatched it out from his hand within a second and threw a punch at him, cracking his bone in the process. A large group of people was caught in a fierce struggle. Just when the buzzcut man was about to get shot in his head, Sadie threw the switchblade at the man without any hesitation and knocked the gun out of his hand. The buzzcut man seized the chance and grabbed the man by his neck. He threw him to the ground and kicked him several times. Suddenly, Sadie saw that some of them were trying to run away in the vans. Just when she was about to go after them, a dozen police cars arrived and surrounded them. Sadie turned her head around when she heard Quincy's voice. She turned her head back to find that a van had already gone out far, but luckily, 2 police cars were chasing after it. The crowd at the scene was subdued by the police and brought to the police cars. There were quite a number of goods left behind. When the police officers carried the crates out and opened them, they were shocked. Not only were there cultural artifacts, but there were some valuable medicinal herbs, such as bear bile, bear paws, and deer tendons. Just smuggling these items alone, not to mention there were dozens of crates of them, was enough to land one in prison for at least 10 years. After Quincy finished talking with the police, he walked towards Sadie. Are you hurt? Sadie glanced at him curiously as if she was asking him who could hurt her. When Quincy noticed that he had asked a stupid question, he cleared his throat and said, well, it's good that you aren't hurt. If not, Mrs. Goldman would be worried about you. Later, when we get into the car, I need your cooperation in giving a statement to the police. Chapter 824. Sadie looked toward Gerald's men and asked, how about them? Quincy replied, they were kidnapped as well, so I guess they would only be detained for 10 to 15 days for fighting in public. Sadie did not say anything anymore. At Bassburg, Maisie and Nolan came to the police station after receiving the message. By the time they arrived there, Sadie and Quincy had just come out of the interrogation room. Sadie. Maisie rushed up to her. Are you all right? Are you hurt? Sadie shook her head. Quincy was rendered speechless. Hello? I'm here too. Don't you think you should show me some concern too? Maisie put her hand on Sadie's shoulder and heaved out a sigh of relief. She offered her a smile and said, that's great to hear. Honestly, when I heard that you were kidnapped, I thought, but I'm really happy that you can come back to me. Sadie lowered her head. Even though she was moved by the fact that someone was worried about her, she did not know how to express her feelings. Nolan and Quincy went to the side. How many of them were caught? We managed to get all of them, but one escaped. Nolan squinted his eyes. He was certain that the one who had escaped must have gone back to inform his comrades about the things that had happened here. He wondered if he could get anything useful from these people other than Peter. He looked at Quincy and ordered, "Go look for Maisie." Maisie? Quincy was stunned. Yeah, he replied. She has a fat fish in her hand, so let's get her out first. Suddenly, he received a call. When Barbara arrived at the parking lot, a car came up to her rapidly and stopped beside her. Before she could do anything, the man inside the car covered her mouth and dragged her into the car. They put a hood over her head and brought her to a room. When they took the hood off, she narrowed her eyes to adjust to the light. Don't just stand here. Go over there. Someone pushed her, and she stumbled a few steps forward. It was only then she saw the surroundings clearly. It was a place that seemed like a casino. The light was dimly lit, and the air was filled with smoke. There were a few men in black suits standing behind her. Go in. One of them grabbed her shoulder and pushed her into a room. The room looked like a medium-sized private room. Two men were sitting on the couch, and one of them was Helios. The man standing behind Helios held him down by pressing on his shoulder. It seemed to Barbara that he had been brought here by force as well. When Helios saw Barbara, he was slightly stunned. The middle-aged man in the front seat wore a green shirt. He rested his arm on the back of the couch, and he was swirling the wine gently in the glass in his hand. The golden watch on his wrist was sparkling under the light. Have a seat, Miss Chase. Make yourself at home, the man said as he waved his hand. The two bodyguards behind her pressed her shoulders to force her to sit down. She looked at Helios before turning back to the man and asked, "You are?" "You can call me Mr. Grant," Tony replied as he put the glass on the table. "I'm sorry to invite you here in this way. I don't mean anything else, I just want to talk to you." Barbara frowned. Something inside of her was telling her that the man before her eyes was not an ordinary man. There was a probability that he was related to them. Tony clasped his hands on his crossed leg. There was a smile on his face, but the smile did not reach his eyes. He looked at Barbara and said, "I'm sorry about what happened to your uncle, and I'm truly grateful that your father is willing to give me a chance." Barbara was stunned, and she subconsciously clenched her fist tightly. Helios looked at him and said, "Let me guess. You brought us here to threaten my father and Michael, right?" Barbara was dumbfounded. Tony chuckled and pointed at him. "It's such a waste that you prefer to stay in the entertainment industry. I thought you're going to take over the position like your father." Helios replied expressionlessly, "I'm not interested in that position." Chapter 825. It seems to me that the Bouchers are going to get destroyed in your hands. Yael has been hogging the position for more than 30 years. Don't you think it's time for someone to take over him like Michael? Helios chuckled and replied, "So? Are you going to use me as leverage to force my father to retire from his position?" Tony smiled but did not say anything. Barbara bit her lips and said, "You're the one behind my uncle's incident." Tony threw himself on the back of the couch and replied, "Well, honestly, he was a poor fellow. He overheard something he shouldn't know in the Glitz Club and got caught." Barbara's face sank. Just as she expected, her uncle's death was not an accident. "It's too bad that the Chases don't have a son," Tony continued as he studied Barbara. "There's nothing you can do since you're a girl. You don't belong to the Chases since you're going to get married one day in the future. Why can't a woman sit in that position?" Barbara asked calmly. "Don't underestimate what we women can do. Do you know that Eric was my nephew?" Barbara froze. She clenched her fist so tightly that her nails stabbed into her palm. What? Eric was his nephew? It was only now that the scale finally dropped before Barbara's eyes. It was no wonder that Eric had the guts to do that to her despite knowing her identity. It was not because of his arrogance, but because he had someone behind him. His mother is my biological sister. When our parents got divorced, I followed our father while she followed our mother. We've never been in touch in all these decades. Tony picked up a glass and smiled coldly. I have to say that her son is a good-for-nothing. Other than indulging himself in eating, drinking, gambling, and frequenting the brothels, he knew nothing. Since I hadn't married yet, I decided to nurture him myself. However, I didn't expect that he would die in your hands. What a loser. Barbara's chest was heaving up and down rapidly. Although those things were in the past, she still couldn't help herself but feel terrified when she learned some of the connections. Helios glanced at her and switched to another topic. It's no wonder that you can monopolize half of the entertainment industry in Esperia. So you don't have any weaknesses. Tony remained single until now. He hadn't married, and he had no children. Even his father had passed away several years ago, so he did not have any weaknesses that other people could use against him. Tony did not fly into a rage after what Helios said. It's rare to find someone as perceptive as you, Mr. Boucher. If you want to be successful, you'll have to give up something, your friends, your family, and even your most treasured belongings. You need to eliminate those who are against your ideas. Weakness is a weapon. It's harmful to others and to yourself as well. If not, both of you guys wouldn't have fallen into my hands. Helios looked in another direction and said calmly, "Are you sure your plan is perfect? Do you know why I didn't confiscate your phones? That's because this place will block all sorts of signals. Even if you have a location tracker on you, people from outside won't be able to pinpoint your location." Tony stood up and walked up to the ceiling-to-floor window. He faced them with his back and continued. "Even if I killed both of you now, no one will know about it. At Black Gold, Mr. Goldman, we can't locate Helios. We lost the lead at Zolo Village." Nolan rubbed his temple and asked, "Can you get to him through the phone?" Quincy shook his head. It was unreachable 30 minutes ago, and now his phone is switched off. Nolan looked at his laptop. The location tracker showed that Helios had been in Zolo Village 30 minutes ago. However, the signal was lost now. Nolan closed his laptop and ordered, "Send someone to check it out. We must not let any clues fall through the cracks." Quincy nodded. Christina had been in an agitated state since she learned that Helios had been taken away. She was having a fight with Yael in the study room. Yael was sitting at the back of the desk, rubbing his temple. Initially, he could still explain to her patiently. But he had lost his patience right now. "Christina, I told you I would bring our son back. Can you please stop for a moment?" Chapter 826. How do you expect me to stop worrying? Christina's eyes were bloodshot. "That's our son. I don't wish to see the incident that took place on Winston Island repeat itself. Do you think I want that to happen?" Yael lifted his head and remained calm throughout the whole conversation. "I'm the one the other party is targeting. And I'll bring Helios back in one piece." Christina was astonished. "What do you mean they're targeting you?" Yael did not say anything. Could it be? Christina seemed to have thought of someone, but she did not dare say the person's name aloud. Could it be Tristan? That's impossible. Tristan wouldn't do this. What could it be? Yael stared at her while she was startled, pursed her lips, and said nothing. Yael seemed to have seen through her and said solemnly, "You're overthinking. This is a matter related to the political circle." Christina's face paled slightly. "You know who I had in mind." Yael stood up and walked out. "Don't think too much. Helios will be fine." Christina stopped him. "You know about it, don't you?" Yael stood behind the door, grasping onto the door's handle, but did not move. Christina turned to look at him. Seeing that he did not react to her question, she covered her mouth, and no one could tell if she was weeping or giggling. You know about the affair between Tristan and me. You've always known but never said anything about it. That's because you've never cared at all. Yael covered his eyes. You're still thinking about Natasha, and you still can't get past her. She would be your current wife if your father hadn't declined your wish to marry an actress back then, wouldn't she? And you'd definitely be happier than you currently are. Christina covered her face and whimpered bitterly. She comforted herself that she could not blame Yael because he was only forced to marry her back then. He has no feelings for me. Even though we've lived together for decades and even share a son together, we can only be a nominal couple who respects each other. Ironically, it's only after I got married that I fell in love with Tristan. He's the only reason I get a chance to know what it's like to be loved. I've repented through countless sleepless nights. I feel guilty because I've cheated on my husband. The feeling of love that I've always begged for and obtained from another man is something that my husband can't give me. I'm just an ordinary woman. I need to be loved too. Yael turned back and hugged her. Christina was shocked by his action, and the sobbing stopped abruptly. Yael soothed his tone. I hadn't confronted you because I care about how you feel. I have no right to blame you for that as I'm the one who owes it to you in the first place. That's why I won't blame you. Natasha is already a woman of the past. I do think about her from time to time, but you're my wife. I'm not very good at coming up with romantic and loving ideas. But I wish to live with you for the rest of my life. At Seoul. Maisie could not get through to Barbara's phone, and there was no reply from her on WhatsApp, so she could not help but frown. Even if she could not reply to my text messages. It's impossible for me not to be able to get through her phone, right? Has she gone to the Glitz Club? Sadai parked the car outside the Glitz Club's entrance and looked out the window. The club isn't open for business. I know that the Glitz Club is closed during the day. But Barbara has been here during the day, which indicates that the premises have another door in addition to the main entrance. Let's go to the side and have a look. Sadai found a parking lot, then got out of the car after Maisie and walked to the door at the side of the building, which was ajar. She pushed open the door and ascended the steps. There was almost no one else in the lobby except for the cleaner sweeping the floor and a few waiters decorating the place. One of the waiters saw her and came forward. I'm sorry, but the club isn't open for business yet. Maisie smiled. I'm here looking for someone. The waiter was taken aback. Then may I know who you're looking for? Chapter 827. Barbara Chase. The waiter knew who Barbara was and gave off a polite smile. Ms. Chase isn't here today. Maisie frowned. Has she not come here at all before this? He replied immediately, yes. We'd know if she's been here. It doesn't look like he's lying. Maisie took a good look around the lobby. Barbara isn't here, and her phone has been turned off, so where would she be? The manager stepped out of the elevator and instructed the employees to tidy up upstairs private rooms. He then turned around, saw Maisie, and was dumbfounded. The waiter walked over to the manager and reported, she's here, for Ms. Chase. Ms. Chase? The manager took a glance at Maisie before walking toward them. Ms. Chase hasn't come here today. May I know why you are looking for her? Maisie replied calmly, I couldn't get through to her phone, and she hasn't replied to my messages, so I thought she would be here. The manager was astounded and seemed a little surprised. You can't get through to her phone? Maisie nodded. She had been observing the manager's expression secretly, and the strange thing was that the manager obviously did not know about this. He looked more confused than herself. She then asked tentatively, does your boss know where she is? The manager returned to his senses and smiled. Our boss won't know Ms. Chase's whereabouts if she hasn't informed us about that. However, he stared at Maisie. "What's your relationship with Ms. Chase?" "She's my friend, and we're rather close." Maisie smiled and then looked away. Her phone has always been turned on. "But it's been turned off out of the blue, so I'm a little worried." The manager was about to say something when two men in black suddenly came into the lobby. As such, he said, "Please give me a second." He then approached the two men in black. One of them said something to him, and his expression dimmed in an instant. The two men got into the elevator after talking to the manager. The manager came over to Maisie. "I'm sorry, but something just came up, and we have to do something about it. As for Ms. Chase, I'll get her to contact you if she comes here today." Maisie did not want to force anything. Even if the other party had hidden Barbara here, she had no evidence and no way to investigate. She was about to leave with Sadai. But the manager seemed to have received a new order and shouted abruptly, "Please stay." Maisie turned around. "Is there anything else?" The manager looked surprised too. "Our boss wishes to see you. Please, follow me upstairs." Maisie and Sadai exchanged gazes. Sadai then nodded. And both of them followed the manager into the elevator. The interior of the clubhouse was enormous. The first and second floors were divided into ordinary large and small private rooms. There was also a booth seating area. There were dozens of private rooms on the first and second floors alone, and there were 20 to 30 tables in the booth seating section. The large and medium booths could accommodate approximately a dozen people, while the smaller ones could accommodate 5 to 6 people. In addition to the first and second floors, the third floor consisted of even larger VIP private rooms that had a suite layout. Each room contained all sorts of entertainment facilities and a karaoke station, and there were only 8 rooms in total. And of course, its price was terrifyingly higher than those located on the first and second floors. The elevator went straight to the 5th floor. The manager turned sideways to let them out of the elevator first. Maisie took a good look at the design specifications of the corridor. The 5th floor's decoration looked different from that of the downstairs, more like a personal design preference. The manager walked up to the office door, knocked on the door, and opened the door to let them in after obtaining permission. Maisie and Sadai entered the office, where its interior was pervaded with the fragrance of orchids. The man sitting on the leather chair, if he was around 36 years old and was wearing gold-rimmed glasses. What he was wearing was not something from a common luxury brand but more like a tailor-made cotton and linen shirt. He was also in a genuine sheepskin vest, looking extremely elegant. This was beyond Maisie's expectations, as she thought the owner of the Glitz Club would look somewhat like Peter. Chapter 828. "Are you the owner of the Glitz Club?" The man opened his mouth slowly. "Yes. And you're Ellie's friend." "I've heard of you, Mrs. Goldman." Maisie was taken aback. He just addressed Barbara as Ellie. It seems like they're very close to each other. But Barbara claimed that she's never met him. Maisie lowered her gaze. "Since you already know who I am, I'll cut to the chase. I'm here looking for her. She might be in trouble, that's why I suspect." The man clasped both his hands and placed them flat on the table. "You suspect that it's us, don't you?" Maisie did not answer. The man continued solemnly. "I'll hurt anyone in the world, anyone except Ellie. I wouldn't let her interfere in Zhivkov's affairs for her own good. If I'm not mistaken, she's indeed in some sort of trouble at this very moment." Maisie lifted her gaze and glanced at him. "Is Ms. Zalinsky in your custody?" He did not deny it. "Yes, I've detained her." Sure enough, Maisie seemed to have understood something. "You should be somehow connected to the Chases. Otherwise, you wouldn't help Barbara like how you did. Since you know her, why didn't you let her know about you?" The man raised his hand and adjusted the glasses frame on the bridge of his nose, but did not answer her question. "I need you to do me a favor, Mrs. Goldman. In return, I'll provide you with an important piece of information, which will be very useful to you. Helios and Barbara were locked away in the same room, the door was guarded, and even the windows were welded and fortified with iron bars. Apart from the bathroom, there was no piece of furniture in the room, not even a stool. The two of them could only sit on the floor and lean against the wall on each side of the room. Helios kept looking out the window, thinking about something. Barbara sat on the floor, curled into a ball, and stared at the floor in a daze. After a long, awkward silence, she asked, "Are we going to die here?" Helios retracted his gaze and turned to look at her. No, she lifted her head. "You don't look worried at all." Helios scoffed. "If these people really wanted to kill us, they would have already done it by now. There must be a reason they're detaining us here, so we'll be safe for another short period." But of course, it would only be a short period. The reason Tony Grant would abduct us is to restrain the Chases and the Bouchers. He'll suffer if he kills us now and provokes Father and Michael Chase. Barbara took her cell phone out and took a glance at it. The phone still had no signal. "When will we get out of this place?" Helios closed his eyes, planning to get some rest. "Wait patiently. I believe that someone will manage to locate us." There was some commotion outside the door, and a man came in with a bag. He then placed the bag on the floor and said with an expressionless face, "This is your dinner for tonight. Don't starve yourselves to death." The man left the room and locked the door again. Barbara stood up, walked toward the bag, opened it, and found 2 fast food meals. "They didn't even give us any water," she complained. She turned her head and stared at the indifferent man before placing the other set meal next to him. "This might not be one of the nutritious meals you're used to having, so just put up with it." Helios opened his eyes and took a glance at Barbara, who had just taken her meal, walked back to the other side of the room, and sat down by the wall. He then stared at the meal next to him, hesitated for a moment, picked it up, and opened it. It contained a lot of vegetables and only a few pieces of meat, making it look very unappetizing. He frowned when he saw Barbara eating her dinner by herself. Don't you think it tastes bad?" "It doesn't taste good." Barbara looked calm as if she had accepted it. "But you're the one who's going to suffer later on if you don't eat it now." Helios did not say anything. He was about to grab his fork when he suddenly froze in place and looked a little embarrassed. "They didn't give me any utensils." Chapter 829. Barbara stopped what she was doing. "They only gave us 1 fork when there are 2 lunch boxes?" He put the lunchbox down. "Forget it. I can survive the night without eating this 1 meal." She did not hesitate before breaking her fork in 2 and giving the top part to him. "Let's just put up with it." Helios looked at her and took the fork from her. The 2 of them could only eat miserably with only half a fork. It rained heavily that night, and the neighborhood's lights looked blurry due to the fog and the rain. Only the Wareham floor lamp placed next to the desk was turned on in the study. After listening to Quincy's investigation report, Nolan closed the documents in his hand. "What did Mr. Boucher say?" Quincy responded, "Mr. Boucher intends to step down from his position and use it as a bargaining chip to save his son. However, I think it's too risky. There's no guarantee they'll let Helios go even if Mr. Boucher keeps his end of the bargain. Tony has most probably abducted Helios. After all, the batch of goods has now been confiscated by the police. And Peter has gone into hiding and refuses to show himself in public. Tony might not even know where his hideout is. So the safest thing that Tony can do now is to keep Helios in his custody in order to restrain Yael." Nolan tapped the desk over and over again with his fingertips. He was thinking about something when Maisie pushed the door of the study open and came in with a cup of coffee. Quincy was stunned. "Ma'am, you're still awake?" "Yo. I realize that it's very difficult for me to get used to that new appellation that you're using." Maisie smiled while putting the cup of coffee on the desk. Quincy took a glance at Nolan and said in the most cowardly tone, "Mr. Goldman is the person who asked me to change the way address you." Nolan raised his eyebrows. He then picked up the cup of coffee that Maisie had brewed with a faint smile. "That's very intuitive of you, making coffee for me at this time." Maisie crossed her arms. "You're not allowed to drink it. I brewed it for Quincy." Nolan was rendered speechless. Quincy chuckled wryly. "I don't need the coffee. I'll suffer from insomnia whenever I consume coffee at night." "Did something happen to Helios too?" Maisie asked as she had actually overheard their conversation on the other side of the door just now. Nolan put down the cup of coffee. "What do you mean by two?" Maisie stared at him. "Barbara has fallen victim to those people." "Did the same happen to Helios too?" Nolan squinted slightly. Quincy was shocked. "What? Ms. Chase has also fallen into the hands of those people? How did you get to know that?" "We only learned that Helios has gotten himself in trouble now." "But why would they kidnap Ms. Chase?" "Michael Chase has already stepped down, and Caleb Chase has died. The Chases are no longer a threat to them." Maisie looked at them. "I went to the Glitz Club with Sadai and met the owner of the Glitz Club earlier today." Nolan frowned. His expression clearly showed that he was not very happy about that. Maisie saw through what he was thinking, stood behind him, massaged his shoulders for him, and coaxed him. "I couldn't contact Barbara this morning, so I went there to find her, but couldn't find her there either. Sadai was with me at that time and she'd protect me." Quincy spoke up suspiciously before Nolan had the chance to say anything. "Speaking of which, the owner of this Glitz Club has an extremely mysterious background. There's no way to find out where he came from. And many customers who've been to the Glitz Club have never seen him before this." Maisie smiled. "Then I should consider myself quite a lucky person. Not only did he know that I'm Mr. Goldman's wife, but he also welcomed me in person." Quincy opened his mouth, but did not utter a single word. Nolan grabbed her wrist, turned around, and looked at her. "Do you think you're that lucky?" Maisie bent down and wrapped her arms around his shoulders and neck from behind. "He gave me a very important piece of information, which may be useful to you." "And what's that?" Chapter 830. It's Peter Zhivkov's son. Quincy was stunned for a split second after listening to what Maisie said and felt even more puzzled at this moment. "Peter's son, what kind of information is this?" Nolan pondered over something. Maisie stood back up and propped her elbows against Nolan's shoulders. "Peter once introduced him to many huge business owners in order to nurture and promote his son. However, what many people don't know is that although Peter's son seems to be a good-for-nothing who leads an unrestrained life, he actually picked up a lot of secrets unknowingly." Quincy was astounded for a moment. "So, this kid is quite an important person in the circle." "Huh?" Peter had always been a shrewd man. He knew that the people behind him would never let him go after his failure in handling the batch of goods, so he ran away. As for his son, Yegor Zhivkov, he was only a rich man's son who only knew how to enjoy his life to the fullest. He would not pose any threat to those people. Even if they wanted to use Yegor to threaten Peter, they would still have to go through Peter's father-in-law, a real estate tycoon in Esperia. The father-in-law might not protect his son-in-law, but Yegor was his grandson. He would not just stand by and watch those people lay their fingers on Yegor. Nolan chuckled softly. "It seems that this boy is indeed a key person who's been overlooked by everyone." Maisie nodded. "No one knows that Yegor has so many secrets up his sleeves. So those people will focus all their energy and attention on that kid once he appears in public. We can use this opportunity to distract them." Quincy clapped his hands. "This is a great idea. What do you think, Mr. Goldman?" Nolan took a sip of coffee. "Since the owner of the Glitz Club is willing to share this piece of information with you, he must have told you his whereabouts too. Right?" He's being offered the best things to eat and drink and enjoying his life in the Glitz Club now. Although the owner of the Glitz Club knows about all these things, he wouldn't hand us this piece of information without asking for anything in return. Nolan turned around and looked at her. Z, what did you promise him? She lowered her gaze. Actually, his condition is rather simple. It's about Barbara. Maisie recalled the favor that the owner of the Glitz Club had asked of her. I hid my identity from Ellie because I don't know how I should face her. She does know me, but she hates me. The only thing that I regret is that I didn't come out and save her when that incident happened. I don't want her to know that I've chosen to help her unconditionally all these years in order to make up for it. Barbara woke up in the middle of the night due to a sudden stomach ache. She curled up against the wall. It was pitch black in the room, and it was raining outside, causing the room to feel damp and cold. Helios heard tiny movements and asked, "What's wrong?" Barbara replied weakly upon hearing Helios' voice. "My stomach hurts. Maybe the dinner that we ate earlier tonight was too greasy." Helios stood up in the dark and fumbled along the wall to get to the door. He then slammed on the door and called for someone to come, being disturbed and woken up in the middle of the night. The guard opened the door and turned on the light impatiently. "Why the fuck are you making so much noise at night?" Helios asked patiently. "Miss Chase has heartburn." "Do you have any medicine?" "Heartburn?" The guard yawned and took a glance at Barbara, who had curled up at the corner of the wall. "Isn't it just a stomachache? Stop being such a princess. Who hasn't experienced a stomachache at least once in their life? Just bear with it. And it'll pass." He was about to close the door when Helios stopped the door with a gloomy expression. "I think Mr. Grant will have a very difficult time explaining this if Miss Chase were to get out of this incident with some permanent injuries, wouldn't he?" The guard had not gotten enough sleep, so he got irritated and pushed Helios out of the way. "Hey, are you trying to cause me trouble here?" Helios' expression remained the same. "Pass my message to Mr. Grant. If he still refuses to compromise, he will be in no position to blame us if anything goes wrong."